Putting me on the spot.
Can we just turn the show off at this point?
Yeah, put me on the... I didn't think I was going to come on here and get a gotcha question.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Tanya.
And we have a very special guest on with us today. You have probably seen him in committee on some of our videos. You may have seen their podcast. You sure as heck would have heard the organization that he's from. We are going to be on with Franco Terrazzano from the Canadian Taxpayer Federation. So, Franco Terrazzano, welcome to the show.
Hey, really good to be with you guys here.
Excellent. For those that don't know who the Taxpayers Federation is, or maybe who you are, why don't you give us a bit of a rundown?
Well, I'm Franco. I'm the federal director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation here in Ottawa, trying to hold the feds to account every time they hike your taxes or waste your money. Now, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we have been around for more than 3 decades. We're a scrappy, nonpartisan, grassroots advocacy organization fighting for 3 very powerful ideals, and that's lower taxes, less waste, and more accountable government.
So based on that, we have a less accountable government, more waste, and higher taxes. So you guys are not thrilled with what the Liberals have done over the last 10 years, are you?
Well, quite frankly, they have been spending through the roof. They've been taking more of your money, and they've been exploding the debt. And I know you want to talk about the state of economy, so we got to start with the federal finances, and man, are they ever in the toilet. Okay, so in just 9 years, Trudeau will have officially doubled the entire federal debt this year. Okay, so think of the 100 plus years of Canadian history leading up to 2015 and the election of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Well, think of all the debt those prime ministers added up. Then in just 9 years, Trudeau will have officially doubled the entire federal debt. So think about your kids, think about your grandkids. A baby born today, she is already on the hook for about $30,000 in federal government debt. And, you know, let me just give you one more reason why this debt explosion under the federal government is such a concerning issue for Canadians right now, not just for future Canadians. Well, interest charges on the debt are costing taxpayers more than $1 billion every single week. More than $1 billion. Okay, folks, that's like the cost of building a brand new hospital. Well, that money is being flushed down the drain because it's going to pay interest charges on the debt. Or let me give you another example here. Every time you're in that checkout line and you're about to pay the federal sales tax, well, every single penny you pay in federal sales taxes is going to pay the interest charges on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government credit card.
That is pretty depressing.
Yeah, that's shocking. Those are huge numbers, right?
Well, and $1 billion every week. We always look at the debt servicing charges and we always ask the question, what could we do with that money instead? Yep. But all we hear from Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau and the rest of the Liberals are, but you're getting the federal dental program, you're getting $10 a day daycare, you're getting, or you will be getting this mythical school lunch program, you're going to getting this pharmacare program. What is the response of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation to those talking points?
Well, for starters, none of this is free. Right? None of this is free. Every time the government spends money, it's not like they're plucking a new dollar out of a magical tree, right? No, they're plucking that money from Canadians' pockets, right? So think about this. The next time you go to the grocery store or the next time you want to sign up your kid for a soccer camp or something like that, and you're worried that you do not have enough money for those activities to go to the grocery store to sign up your kid or grandkid for the summer camp. Well, one of the big reasons you don't have enough money, or you might be stressed out about your bills is because the government is taking so much money from your pockets in the first place, right? So essentially, when these governments roll out these big, shiny new programs, what they're doing is taking a whole bunch of money out of your left pocket and then sprinkling a little bit, a little bit back into your right pocket after they already skim off a bunch off the top to pay for a bunch of these bureaucrats to deliver the programs, right? Wouldn't it just be better for the government to leave more of your own money in your own pocket so that you can choose which programs that you rely on, right? Wouldn't that be a little bit better? But not just that. Because what we saw over the last couple of years during the height of the pandemic is a different way that the federal finances and spending were financed. And what I mean by that is that we had the central bank, the Bank of Canada, print hundreds of billions of dollars out of thin air to finance Government of Canada borrowing. That is the inflation tax. The Bank of Canada printing these fresh dollars out of thin air and then dumping it into an economy that was largely locked down for a number of years. Well, that creates the perfect storm for inflation. Too many dollars chasing too few goods.
I had read that Canadians are now paying more in taxes than they are for basics like housing and clothing. Is that true?
Oh, it is true. Nearly half of the average Canadian family's total income is going to taxes. Okay, so take your paycheck, take your bank account, rip it in half nearly, because that's the government's. That's the tax man's.
We've also heard a lot of talking points from the Conservatives. We've heard a lot of talking points from the Liberals on the carbon tax. We've also heard from Jagmeet Singh that, the cost of food has nothing to do with the carbon tax. It has nothing to do with anything but greedy CEOs. So since the Canadian Taxpayer Federation doesn't necessarily care what party you are, they care about what the actual facts are. What are you guys seeing in terms of the carbon tax? What is it damaging? Is it revenue neutral? What is going on?
Oh, it's damaging. It's really damaging. Look, I shouldn't laugh, but that whole baloney talking point just really irks me. And sometimes after banging your head against the wall for years, you got to laugh or you would cry. So first, let's start with this whole notion of greedflation. So we just saw inflation reach a 40-year high. Is Mr. Singh of the NDP really suggesting that all of a sudden corporations have become greedy? Really? Because if that's Mr. Singh's line of thinking, then maybe we should be sending corporations thank you notes over the last 40 years for keeping inflation below what it is now.
Yeah, apparently it's new.
Yeah, apparently it's new. Of course, it's not just all of a sudden when prices reach a 40-year high that it's greedflation. There's two things leading to inflation. Number one, as I mentioned, the massive deficits, massive debt, and the massive money printing that has been going on in Ottawa. Look, politicians and bureaucrats, they always try to forget the one lesson of history and economics. More money printed out of thin air by government leads to higher prices. That is a law of economics, just like the law of gravity in physics. Okay, so Mr. Singh and Trudeau and his Liberal government, they are completely in the wrong. On this issue, Mr. Poilievre, when he says axe the carbon tax, he's exactly in the right. And the carbon tax is so damaging for a number of reasons, particularly for Canada. Think about Canada, folks. It's a very big country. You got to drive to work. You got to drive to see the parents, grandparents, and in-laws. Well, guess what? The carbon tax makes it more expensive for you to fuel up your car with gasoline and diesel. Canada is also a very cold country. So when you got to stay warm during the winter months with natural gas, guess what? The carbon tax makes that more expensive. And the carbon tax also makes food more expensive in this way. So number one, Canadian farmers, well, they need to use propane and natural gas to heat their barns and dry their grain. Well, the carbon tax on natural gas and propane on Canadian farms will cost Canadian farmers $1 billion by 2030. Number two, you know those big trucks that deliver our groceries to the store? Well, they got to fuel up those big rigs with diesel. The carbon tax makes that more expensive. So in very simple terms, when you make it more expensive for farmers to grow food and you make it more expensive for truckers to deliver food, you make it more expensive for all Canadians to buy food.
Well, and then we get to the claims from Jagmeet Singh that, well, the grocers are making record profits. Well, technically, I would imagine that must be true, because when you talk about the amount of money that they make and you look at what inflation has done, yes, they would be making more money than ever before, because yesterday a apple cost 50 cents, and now because of inflation it costs around 80 cents. So yes, they are making more money than ever before. But from what we've seen, their profit margin has stayed flat through this whole scenario. So yes, they have more money, but the profit margin stays the same. You're seeing the same thing?
When the prices go up, the prices for businesses to buy stuff also goes up, right? Their input costs also go up. Like, it's not this greed inflation. Like, that's not what's happening. Maybe there is greed inflation, but that's only on the part of the government, right? The government. That is really the greedy ones. Here are the politicians and bureaucrats that take your money and waste it on extravagant trips for themselves, for example. But you know what? If Trudeau or Singh were really worried about greedy corporations and they wanted rich corporations to pay their fair share, why don't they just make rich multinational corporations pay for their own factories? But wait a second here. We've seen the Trudeau government announce tens of billions of dollars for multinational corporations like Volkswagen, like Stellantis, like Northvolt, like Honda to build these new EV battery factories. Well, if they were really worried about these greedy corporations, shouldn't they just make corporations pay for their own factories?
Well, and isn't it even more concerning by the fact that there's been recent announcements from companies like Toyota and General Motors and Ford that they are slowing down or pausing EV production because people aren't buying them. They can't afford to buy these EVs. And also in a country like Canada, when we don't have the charging infrastructure across the country to even deal with these, and never mind the fact that it's been proven, and we see it because Tanya has a hybrid, the battery efficiency in the cold goes down by half. So Canada being a cold country and a very sparse country, it doesn't really make sense to have a very large market of EVs. But now you want to incentivize all of these companies, literally bribe them to come to Canada, so then you can turn around and tell everybody, look, the economy is great because other countries or other companies are investing in Canada. Well, not really, because you've essentially handled all of the investment for them. You're basically just saying, you can come set up shop for free, we'll pay your ticket.
Oh, you've really got the juices flowing tonight, So there's a couple things. So number one, I couldn't tell you the first thing about the EV market. I'm not an EV expert. I'm not an EV investor. If I was, maybe I'd be doing something else and making more money, right? So I don't know the first thing about the EV market. You know who else doesn't know the first thing about the EV market? The politicians and bureaucrats in Ottawa who are taking your money to give to these multinational corporations, right? If they really knew what would be a good investment, do you think they would be in government, or would they be investing their own money for these crazy returns that they promise Canadians? Okay. And here's the problem with corporate welfare. And I've got the data to back it up. You have these politicians and you have these bureaucrats that smile for the camera and they promise taxpayers the moon. Well, guess what, folks? We got access to information requests from the federal government going back like 30 years nearly on hundreds of different corporate subsidies. And we just asked them, how many jobs are created over these nearly 3 decades? Well, guess what? The government records show that the government couldn't even be bothered to track how many jobs were even created. So you have these politicians who are spending billions of taxpayers' money, and these government bureaucrats, according to their own records, aren't even keeping track if any of these jobs materialize. But number two, right, going back to kind of the first point I made where I don't know the good investment, but neither do the politicians and bureaucrats. These politicians in Ottawa, they couldn't balance the budget of a lemonade stand. And now we're supposed to think that these are some highly touted investment bankers. Come on, think of the incentives on the market. On the market, if you're an entrepreneur, you spend your own money, but you also suffer the loss if things don't go well. So you have the incentive to be very smart with your investments. But when you're in government, you don't have that incentive. It's not your money, right? You're spending other people's money. You have the political incentive. Now ask yourself why all of these announcements seem to be happening around the swing ridings, right? Around the battlegrounds, whether that's southwestern Ontario or in Quebec. Isn't that interesting? But the third point, and I think the most important point here, that even if this investment materializes, even if the jobs materialize, it's a shell game. Because again, this money isn't falling from the sky. What the government is doing is taking money out of the productive sector of the economy, out of the entrepreneurs who grow their businesses, who employ people in their communities, and giving it to these corporations that are essentially accepting the handouts. So at best, it's a shell game.
Well, and what we're seeing is we are seeing the entrepreneur market just start to crumble in Canada. We're seeing small businesses disappear. What we are seeing is food-related businesses pop up, because it seems that that's the only spot where Canadians are playing their money. We know some artisan craft vendors that go to these local markets, around the fairs and stuff like that. They've stopped going because they've said nobody is buying my stuff. What people are buying at these fairs is food, because at least they justify in their head that they're actually consuming it. But nobody's buying knickknacks anymore. Nobody's buying handmade things anymore because they can't afford it. Yeah. So it plays along what you just said, is that they are sacrificing all of these small business owners in order to try and get elected again, and that's the real tragedy here. So when you look at what could be in, let's say, 18 months, the Conservative government is going to be inheriting $1.4 trillion in debt, somewhere around there. A massive debt servicing fee. They want to cut taxes, but there's going to be a bunch of programs that are going to need to be cut in order to balance the budget. So are the Conservatives in for a rough ride when they try to cut income tax but lower the cost of government services?
They're in for a rough ride regardless. Like, if they think that they're going to get in there and the union bosses, for example, in Ottawa, aren't going to light their hair on fire regardless of what they do, well, then they got another thing coming. So you might as well just do the right thing and actually cut spending. Okay? And look, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, but the way I crunch the numbers, the only way that a new government or any government would ever be able to actually fix the budget and actually cut taxes, then they're going to have to shrink the bureaucracy in Ottawa. Like, the way that I look at the math, there's just no other way around it. Okay. So in the last, 9 years since Trudeau was elected, he's added 108,000 new federal government employees. Okay. So now the federal bureaucracy consumes more than half of the government's day-to-day spending, right? It's the simple math. If you want to balance the budget, if you want to take the budget deficit from $40 billion to a surplus, they're going to have to shrink the bureaucracy. Okay, so if you hear any politicians say, we want to fix the budget, we want to cut taxes, well, that's good. But their ability to deliver on that promise will be directly tied to their ability to shrink the bureaucracy. There really is no way around that. So do I think it's going to be easy? No, I don't. I think they're going to get backlash, from the obvious people like the government union bosses that they went on strike last year. You'll have the environmental groups throwing a fit. You'll have the big corporation lobby groups who want their pork as well. But you know what? I think Canadians are just sick and tired of a federal government that wastes our money and hikes our taxes. And one of the ways that they're going to have to, solve this problem is they're going to have to go after the big part of the arithmetic. And the big part of the arithmetic are the 108,000 extra government employees that Trudeau has hired since becoming prime minister.
Well, that's one thing I don't know if a lot of Canadians do know, is that if you look at every organization, whether it's private or public, usually the highest expenditure in your OPEX is salary. That consumes almost in the majority cases, that's your highest spend. So that's why when companies are struggling, whether public or private, salaries are usually what they go after. They don't, necessarily cut product lines. They will cut their highest expense, which is, all right, what people can we do without? So, the fact that Trudeau has hired all of these people to administer the carbon tax, for example. I think we've actually quoted your website. I think the cost is $200 million.
Correct.
Is that you found. That's a staggering number.
That's huge.
And then for them to come around and say, oh, well, but it's neutral.
No, it's not. And can I just pick up on that, because I almost missed it when you asked me about the carbon tax, first of all. Okay, so here's the thing, folks. Okay, let's just outline the carbon tax. So first of all, you have the carbon tax, which makes the necessities of living in Canada more expensive, okay? But then the government has skimmed $200 million off the top to pay for the federal paper pushers that impose the carbon tax. Then on top of all that, guess what? The federal government charges its sales tax on top of the carbon tax. That'll cost Canadians about $600 million this year, the tax on tax alone. Okay, so think about this. There is no way that a government can impose a tax, then skim hundreds of millions of dollars off the top, then charge a sales tax on top of the tax, and somehow make everyone better off with rebates. It's impossible. And honestly, I think everyone outside of the Ottawa bubble understands that. It's impossible. Of course, this is not revenue neutral. This is a tax that is costing Canadians dearly.
Well, and what does it say about a government that seems like they have many hills they're going to die on in terms of some of these talking points, and the carbon tax talking point of 8 out of 10 Canadians is better off after the carbon tax. It's embarrassing at this point watching them try and push this.
It is embarrassing. And look, if the Liberals do want to climb out of these polling depths, right? Some polls show them 20 points behind the Conservatives. I mean, look, this is not a communications problem that the government has. I'm not going to say here and say the Prime Minister's communication is great, but you'll hear all the talking heads, you'll hear the pundits say, oh, it's a communications problem. It's not a communications problem. It's a carbon tax is making people's lives more expensive problem. And I think that the only way that this government, or should I say the Liberals, are going to be able to pull themselves out of the depths of the polling that they're in is they're going to have to actually change course on policy, because Canadians are sick and tired of just more lipstick on a pig. So if the Liberals do want to reverse course, if they do want to gain trust back with Canadians, and that's a big if, I'm not sure if they're going to be able to do it, but if they do want to do that, then they're going to have to scrap the carbon tax, they're going to have to stop this crazy wasteful spending, and they're going to have to actually balance the budget or come with a credible plan to balance the budget within the next few years. But, as of this point, as of this time, we haven't seen that at all. And hey, can I just poke one more hole in the carbon tax? And
Please
I think, and I thought you wouldn't mind. And I think this might be, the most devastating attack against the carbon tax. Look south of the border, the U.S. Neither the Democrats or the Republicans are ever going to run on the carbon tax. Right?
Well,
there's an election right now. Well, no, I think they understand that a carbon tax doesn't actually help the environment. It just makes your citizens more poor. But hold on a second. The U.S., our largest trading partner, our largest ally, and in many respects, our largest competitor, they don't have a national carbon tax. But guess what, folks? About 70% of countries around the world also do not have a national carbon tax. So think about how that impacts not just Canadians, but our workers, our business community, and our ability to attract investment when we have such a damaging carbon tax, and about 70% of countries do not have a national carbon tax.
Yeah, speaking about pretty much making Canadians worse off with this carbon tax, the Liberals are now promising fairness for every generation with this new with the new capital gains tax. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, fairness for future generations is quite laughable when, as of this year, in less than a decade, the government will have doubled the entire federal debt. Who's going to be making payments on that debt for the rest of their lives? It's Canadians' kids and grandkids and maybe even great-grandkids, right? So let's set aside that for a quick second. But hold on a second here, right? What is the capital gains tax actually accomplishing? It's not balancing the budget. right? With the way that Trudeau is spending, he's going to blow through that extra capital gains tax cash in less than a week, right? It's also not about making the tax system more fair, because if this was just about realigning the tax system, then somebody's taxes would be going down. But we're not seeing that at all. This year alone, you've had the carbon tax, you've had payroll tax increases, you've had this capital gains tax hike, you've had a new digital service tax being brought in, a streaming tax, and also alcohol taxes have gone up as well. So, if you want to drink your sorrows away because of the tax man, too bad. Trudeau's taking more money out of your wallets there as well. And it's also not really about making the rich pay their fair share, like you like to hear Freeland and Trudeau say. Number one, if it was really about making the rich pay more, just make corporations pay for their own factories. But number two is that this capital gains tax increase, it's not just going to soak the monopoly man, right? This is going to hurt doctors, for example, who save lives their whole career, and now we're just trying to save for the retirement. It's also going to hurt, the small businesses who, instead of getting a fat government pension like our MPs are getting, they rely on the sale of their business to fund their golden years, right? Or anyone who might have a rental property who also rely on the sale of that property to fund their golden years, or a cottage or something of that nature. So far from just going after the monopoly man, this capital gains tax hike will have real life hard implications for many, many normal Canadians.
Is there any truth to the Liberals possibly putting a tax on selling your primary residence? They've been promising that they won't, but we've heard whispers and rumors that they could.
Yeah, and we've done a few videos on that, and it's disturbing, the rumblings that we're seeing.
Well, I'm really happy you guys have been sounding the alarm over this, right? Because on the one hand, you have Trudeau pinky promising that he's not going to impose a home equity tax. But then on the other hand, all the actions of Mr. Trudeau and his government is that Canadians should be very worried that a home equity tax would be coming into place. And here's some of the things that we've seen. In 2016, the Trudeau government brought in a mandatory reporting requirement with the CRA. So when you sell your home, you got to tell the CRA what you made off that sale. Well, hold on a second. Is the CRA just curious, right? They just want to know? Or
they have nothing to do.
They have nothing to do. They just want to look at your home sale. Well, I don't think so, right? Because if the tax man isn't going to tax your home, then why do they want to know how much you made from that sale? But number two, and I think this is a very important point, is that the Trudeau government spent about 450,000 of our tax dollars, if I'm not mistaken, or at least I should say hundreds of thousands of our tax dollars, funding and promoting a report that recommended a form of a home equity tax.
And that was from Generation Squeeze.
Yeah, correct. I think we did a video on that one.
Yeah.
Correct, right? And number three is that even after the capital gains tax hike, you have the government still running a $40 billion deficit. So you essentially have these politicians and bureaucrats flipping over the couch cushions looking for as much money as they can get from Canadians. So I think that Canadians have every right and reason to be worried that Trudeau is going to be sending the tax hounds after our homes.
Well, and I think there was some news out over the last couple of weeks that I believe it came out of the Parliamentary Budget Office that their estimate for how much they were going to get from the capital gains is not going to be anywhere near where they hoped, which I think, to your point, that's going to cause the Liberals to look for other sources of money in order to avoid going over their quote-unquote guardrail of $38 billion in spending deficit for their budget. And the home equity tax seems like it's primed to do that. But the political strategy question that I have is, how could he possibly be thinking about doing that during an election year? That would be suicide. Even like they're dead in the water now, but they would challenge the bloc for how much popular support they would have by the time the election comes.
Yeah, I don't think it would be smart. but I've never been accused of thinking that politicians are always doing the smart thing. You know what I mean? Like, look, I'm like, full disclosure, I'm not a strategist for any of these parties. I've never been a political strategist, so I don't know. But what I am worried is when you have a government that has their backs up against the wall, they're going to be grasping for different ideas. And look, like, we've seen this government makes a lot of bad mistakes for taxpayers. So I think that Canadians have to be on guard. And I think that when you see these trial balloons popping around, us Canadians have to push back with like very forcefully with their advocacy, right? So when you see these headlines in the news that Trudeau might be flirting with a new home equity tax, you got to email. You got to take action. You got to send emails. You got to write letters. You got to make phone calls. You got to talk to your member of parliament. Like, the only way that we're going to stop this is if Canadians stay engaged with their advocacy, saying enough is enough is enough.
Playing devil's advocate, and this makes me feel a little squirrely inside, but I'll ask the question. Have you seen anything in terms of Canadian taxpayers that the Liberal government plus the NDP have done to benefit them?
Putting me on the spot.
Can we just turn the show off? This one?
Yeah, put me on the... I didn't think I was going to come on here and get a gotcha question, but I mean, if you can excuse my reference, I mean, getting hit in the face twice is better than getting hit 4 times. So, this year, the government was planning on increasing the alcohol tax by close to 5%. They ended up increasing the alcohol tax by 2%. So, I mean, like I said, getting hit in the face twice is better than 4 times. But the alcohol tax is still going up. To be more realistic, we have seen, I believe the government removed the GST from new rental construction builds, right, as a way to try to get some relief in the housing market, right? So, like, look, that's a good thing, and with that, the government essentially admitted that taxes make things more expensive. Like, happy that you figured that out, 9 years into it. I just wish they'd be cutting taxes more, right? I guess, like, one other thing, I guess, if you can call this a win, is the Atlantic carbon tax carve-out, right? You might remember this. When was this? Back in the fall, when the government decided to take the carbon tax off of furnace oil for 3 years, which would predominantly provide relief for Atlantic Canadian families. I just think that relief should have been extended to all of Canadians, right? Like, why is it fair? I'm happy that some Atlantic Canadians predominantly will have gotten some relief on their carbon tax bill over the winter, but what about the people like my family living in southern Alberta, where it gets -20, -30, and they're using natural gas, right? Those Canadians, 97% of Canadians, were left out in the cold, paying the carbon tax this winter. So, I'm happy that Atlantic Canadians got some carbon tax relief this winter. I just think every Canadian needed that relief.
Well, if you talk to the Liberals, they will say, well, Franco, they should have voted for a Liberal then.
There's Liberals outside of Atlantic Canada, so I don't know what that says.
And then the other talking point was, well, no, we extended this to all of Canada. Never mind the fact that in terms of per capita, all of the home heating oil users are in Atlantic Canada. Yeah. There's some throughout the rest.
And then also too, why did they announce that relief with Trudeau being surrounded by his Atlantic Canadian caucus?
Right. And he was afraid of losing all of the Atlantic provinces, and it looks like he's going to lose them anyway, which, surprise. Where's my surprise face when you need it? But he's just, at this point, he's playing all of his cards, and it's all coming up as a bust as far as we can see. In terms of Pierre Poilievre and some of his economic policies, I think it's unfair to really judge a lot of it at this point, because even though he's talked about some of these things, he's not going to be laying out the details until we actually get into election. So Trudeau can't steal more of what he thinks are good ideas and then say, but what gives you any optimism, or is there any optimism in what the Conservatives have outlined thus far in terms of what they would do if they take government?
Well, first, let me just say what actually brings me optimism. And you know, I probably sound a bit like a rain cloud today, so I'm sorry. I'm sorry to rain on everyone's parade, but I'm actually like quite an optimistic person. And what's really giving me optimism is that I think just Canadians are just sick and tired of all this wasteful spending and higher taxes, right? I think Canadians are kind of waking up and they're like, well, it's really the government that's making my life more expensive and harder right now. So, I'm actually very optimistic about it because for any politician, right, to actually stay or get elected, well, they need the people behind them. And the people are saying enough is enough. So that is what really makes me optimistic. Now, to your main question about what the Conservative Party is talking about, well, I mean, a lot of what they're saying sounds pretty good, right? Scrap the carbon tax, great. Defund the CBC, awesome. Fix the budget, great. End the bonuses for failing government authorities, right on. Now, the question is twofold. Number one, the devil is always in the details, especially when it comes to political promises written down on a piece of paper. So, will a future government scrap the carbon tax, but then, impose industrial carbon taxes, which are just carbon taxes by other names? That's something we have to look out for. What does it mean to fix the budget? Something we'll have to look out for. But number two, you remember, politicians can always say good things. And to Mr. Poilievre's credit, he has taken a lot of leadership on these issues. And what he's saying so far is what I just outlined: scrapping the carbon tax, fixing the budget, defunding the CBC, ending the taxpayer-funded bonuses for failing government authorities. Like, that is all good. So now the key is you have to keep the politicians maintaining those promises and actually delivering on those promises when they get in government, right? Because that's what it's actually all about. It's not just about getting good promises. It's about actually getting good policy done by the government that is in power.
Franco, can you tell our viewers where they can follow you and your work?
Yeah, well, first, I just want to say thank you so much for this conversation. Really enjoy talking to you and your audience. If you want to learn more about the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, a couple ways that you can do it. Number one, head over to our website, taxpayer.com, or follow us on social media. We're pretty well on every social media platform, and just search Canadian Taxpayers Federation. If you want to follow me on Twitter or Instagram or something like that, very easy, at Franco_nomics.
Thank you so much, Franco, and we'll have to do this again sometime.
Hey, that'd be great. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Thank you.